Risk is definitely something you learn to handle very, very quickly. And again, that is the first question, I guess, or the first parallel to management. Do managers learn to tackle risk?
Impulses and Perspectives, the DIKT Expert Talk hosted by Nikolai Behr.
Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk to Professor Dr. Guy Katz. He started his career as officer at the Israeli Defence Forces, studied business administrations at the University of Munich, and is for 10 years now Professor for International Management and Leadership at FOM University in Munich. Hello, Guy.
Hi, Nikolai. Good to be here.
And a very unique point with Guy is that he is the flying professor. He is also flight instructor. So right. How can you manage all these jobs you have?
There was this one Harvard professor that I always forget the name, who spoke about the future being a future of gig economy, I believe was the term. That when you do stuff well, why do it all the time and do just one thing at a time, right? So we'll have many, many kinds of gigs. And I think that's how I can describe my life. I have as a gig as a professor. I mean, it's a bit more than that, obviously. Some other gigs in business, and one gig that I'm especially proud of is flying. And I've always wanted to fly, and that's how I became the flying professor. Actually, the funny story is that it started as a joke, like, there's a flying professor again, because I fly myself into projects or customers or whatever. And at some point I was like, okay, it's actually not a joke. I am the flying professor. And then I made it into my little slogan kind of and website and stuff like that. So yeah, that's me. I'm the flying professor. That's right.
So our topic today is, what can managers learn from pilots? And that would be my first question. What are the big learnings manager take away in your seminars, in your programs?
Yeah, I think one situation I want to go back to is my first flight lesson. And it's really funny, we studied to manage for years and years with doctorates and MBAs and courses and Fortbildungen in German and all kinds of stuff. But then I remember my first flying lesson, and I was sitting there in a tiny little plane with a flight instructor I barely know. And I was thinking to myself, my goodness, how does he do it all? How does he fly the plane? He communicates, he navigates, he looks for other planes, he looks for weather. Wow, like I'll never be able to do this. And behold, 45 hours later or so, that's the minimum, you fly a plane and you do all that in such a short time. And so over my career as a pilot and as a, management scholar, I would say, I kept pulling parallels. Like if we could learn to fly so fast, and again, it takes a lot of practice and not everybody's the same and so on and so forth, but still, with very clear procedures, with very clear rules, with very clear emergency procedures that I'm sure we'll talk about later, what to do when things go wrong. How come we need so many years to learn to manage? And then the question is, do we learn to manage the right way? Or is it just theories that, at the end of the day, everybody who starts a job say, now I have to forget what I learned in university and sort of restart again. So in flying, it's not like that. You don't forget what you learn. You learn to fly in order to fly. There's not going to be a flight instructor next to you at some point. And again, it takes quite quick. So there's a lot of stuff that we can learn about procedures, about learning, about having the right information at the right time, and so on and so forth. There's really a lot.
Is it that you learn faster flying because there's this constant threat of life? If you do a big mistake, you're dead practically. And in business, you can make mistakes because it's other people's money.
Yeah, and that's funny that you say that. One of the things I always speak about in some of my courses is actually, for example, when you negotiate with someone, there's a huge difference whether it is their money, family business, or if it's a corporate and they don't care as long as it's in the budget. So indeed, there is differences which come to psychology of where I come from. But to go back to flying, I don't think this being scared is the main issue here. Although I can tell you that some pilots never learn to fly because they're too scared. Now, it's funny, risk management is something super important, both in flying and management. And we're taught not to take unnecessary risks with flying. Literally, you can die, as you say, on the one hand. On the other hand, yeah, at some point you're in this little tin called a Cessna and you're in the air and there's no parachutes, right? You can only learn how to glide maybe if the engine has a problem. So risk is definitely something you learn to handle very, very quickly. And again, that is the first question, I guess, or the first parallel to management. Do managers learn to tackle risk? And I'm speaking all kinds of risks that you have in flying. Again, it could be the weather, it could be other planes, it could be not seeing where you go, and so on and so forth. So in those first flight lessons, I told you I was totally overwhelmed the first time. I literally was amazed how this is all possible. But actually, after a while, one of the tasks you need to do when you start learning to fly in the beginning, not flying fancy planes like you have behind you, or the one I have, other side, behind me, is navigation with a map, right? You need to know how to find your way with a map because maybe the GPS will break or you don't even have one. And that was actually part of I was pretty good at. And the flight instructor was like, wow, you're really good at navigating. Like nobody's this good at navigating so fast. And I'm like, well, that's because of officer's course, right? So I took something from that world as well, which helped me in flying. And then again, our question for today, I guess, is what can you take from flying into management? And I would say there's so many things. So this is called the six-pack. Now, this is not like the six-pack I do not have on my belly, right? This is cockpit six-pack. And basically, this is the layout of every cockpit in the world. Now, some are digital, like the ones behind you, but basically, this is what we all, that's great. Actually, the six-pack can be found there too. It's just in a bit of a different way. But if you look on the left side of your picture, actually, you can see some analog clocks. And it's actually these, and they're there for emergency as a backup if all the fancy screens go off. But the idea of the six-pack is a very interesting one because it's always in the same layout. Let's go over it really quickly. So here we have the airspeed, right? This is what keeps you alive. If you're too slow, you can stall. Here we have the artificial horizon. Very important to know if you're going up or down, left or right, especially in bad weather. You don't need it when you can see outside, but you need it in bad weather. Of course, here's the altitude. You need to be at a certain height. Then we have here at the bottom how fast you're climbing, and of course the compass next to it. And last but not least, the turn indicator. It shows us how fast we're turning and if we're doing a proper turn. Now, I don't want to really go into all the instruments, but I would like to discuss the six-pack is something super important. Every plane in the world has this, and it's always built this way. And that is, I think, a very, very interesting thing because the idea is to have the most essential information always at the same place. Now, think about KPI cockpits, for example. I mean, it's taken from here. I'm sure you've seen it, Nikolai. In many companies, managers get these 50 pages of whatever numbers for whatever KPIs, and it's just so confusing. They don't know where to look. So actually, my first rule in managing or in strategy is it has to be simple and it has to be fit on one page. If we can have all the information we need to fly a plane safely, the same way over and over again, we should be able to do the same thing in management. It's about finding information, relevant information, fast, and always at the same place. I think this is a very good lesson, isn't it?
So with this six-pack, also the positions are fixed? They are worldwide always in the same position?
Yeah, and you even learn to scan them. So basically the middle is here. So your eyes on the artificial horizon, just to know that you're going, straight and not up or down. And then you always kind of learn to scan every few seconds, a little bit to the left to see your altitude, a little bit to the right to see your airspeed, sometimes down, but less often, just to make sure you're on the right, way for the compass, and so on and so forth. But basically, your eyes are most of the time here. It depends how you're flying, right? We have two kinds of flight by instruments, where you really need this, and flight by visual flight rules, where you're just looking outside, which is practically like driving a car. But for that, you need really, really good weather. And the second the weather is not good, your life depends on the six-pack.
So what would you recommend managers to keep an eye on? Which KPIs are the most important? What is the six-pack of management KPIs you would recommend?
Oh gosh, there's so many. You know what? I don't think it would be smart to answer this question in a general way because it truly depends on what business we're talking about and what position. But what we can learn from the six-pack is simple. You don't need more than 6 instruments. 5, maybe 6 numbers That's more than enough if you choose the right ones to manage your business. And my favorite KPIs are actually not the standard, I don't know, revenue, cost, this kind of thing. Of course, we need to look at those too. I actually really like using soft KPIs as well. For example, one of my favorite ones in general is the amount of sick days per employee on average. It's a really great number. It literally shows you the health of your company, literally. And if people are getting more sick, it usually means they're unhappy. Of course, you need to find out why. So I try to find unconventional KPIs in addition to the standard ones. And let's say we have 6 numbers. Maybe you can do 3 hard KPIs and 2 or 3 soft KPIs as well. That would probably be my tip.
Oh, I like this soft KPI very much. It's very interesting. There was once a time in Germany when they introduced a day. How did they call it? It was when Helmut Kohl was chancellor, and they said the first 2 days you're not gonna get paid if you're sick. So the number of sick days went down extremely for a couple of years. But then the government changed and they redone it. So the off days, the sick off days went up again.
I think it's really sad talking about sickness that we live in one of the best places in the world, economically speaking, still, if we keep it up. And the amount of sick days is one of the highest in the world. And that's not a good sign for many, many things. So actually, I come from Israel, and Israel is a very interesting country because it is somewhere between the social economics we have here in Germany and the capitalism, hard capitalism, as we have in the United States. It's really somewhere in between. So in Israel, you have the first sick day, you don't get paid. The second sick day, you get half a pay. And from the third sick day, you are fully paid. And that's kind of a balance in between what you just said and what we have now, which I think, and it works quite well.
Seems to be a clever system because if you're really sick, you can afford to have 1 day not paid off. But all the guys who do partying on the weekend and say, okay, this Monday, I won't go in. My brother, they probably go in then.
And my brother is a family doctor here in Munich, and he says 90% of people coming in just want to get written sick for work. And the rest of the 10%, he actually needs to know what he's doing.
So you have another example for some of these soft skills you talk about?
Yeah, let's look at the instruments again. So, for example, the airspeed indicator. I think that's a great one. Obviously, it shows you your speed. But what it also has, I don't know if you can see it, you see there's 4 colors, right? You have white, you have the green, and then the yellow at here, 160 approximately, you have the red line. And this is also a very interesting indicator because it's not just the speed that matters, but when to use what speed. So, Nikolai, can you guess what the colors are for before I tell you?
I actually had flight lessons, but that's 30 years ago.
Well, then you should know, right? Then you should know.
Well, just from the colors, I would say green is the area where you should be in. Yellow, you have to pay attention, and red is red flag.
That's right. So red is red flag. That's clear. Like above red, you shouldn't go. Your plane could break apart, and there's no guarantee that it's going to work anymore. So that's very clear. But actually, the green and yellow are really interesting. It has nothing to do with the plane. It has to do with the weather. So if the weather is great, if there's no turbulence, wind, clouds, you can actually fly in the yellow. It's not a problem at all. But if the weather is not so great, you should keep your speed down and fly in the green. And if you ever notice when you're in a commercial jet and the weather gets kind of bumpy, one of the first things you often hear is the engines going down a little bit to get into the green area. And I think this is very interesting. Speaking of change of turbulences in business, the question is, when can we go full power? Because, many people don't realize this. Many planes, actually, the more high performance the plane, the faster it is, the bigger it is. It's almost always in the yellow because you're pushing the limits, right, to go as fast as you can. As long as the weather is good, it's fine. But then in times of change, in times of turbulence, you have to speed down a bit and watch out because your plane could break already at 140 knots, for example. And that is also a very wonderful analogy we can make to business, right?
So that means for managers in turbulent times, be slower and watch out more on the weather, on the conditions.
communicate, talk to your people, do town halls, catch them up. Don't do the same speed of business, or don't expect, because your plane could crash. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a nice one. Let's see, maybe we can take another one. For example, the altitude indicator. So again, this is about the height or the elevation that you're flying. But the interesting thing about this is that it doesn't work if you don't set the pressure correctly. Maybe you remember this from your flight lessons, right? Yeah. So this is here in
hectopascal.
Yeah, 1013 is the standard. And this is also very interesting for managers, right? Your indicators don't even work if you don't set them correctly. And, the pressure changes from day to day, from region to region, mountainous, non-mountainous area. And we keep adjusting the hectopascal, the pressure in the air. Otherwise, literally, we do not know what level we're on. And again, the same goes for business. I teach a lot of strategy for many years. And I often ask people, what's the most important thing in strategy? And people tell me things like KPIs and targets and whatever, milestones, things like that. But people never tell me the actual most important thing. And I'm quoting Mr. Mintzberg, who I really like, from the 1985, I believe, who said the most important thing in strategy is actually the flexibility, the ability to see change, the ability to adjust your pressure, if I'm going here back to the indicator, because otherwise old strategies just won't work anymore. And you have to constantly adapt and change to your surrounding environment, again, temperatures, things like that. And I think that's another beautiful analogy from our cockpit.
That's a very nice picture. And we just saw in the pandemic that these managers who have been very flexible have been much more successful than this one who kept their course and said, well, it will be soon over.
Yeah, and well, those who adapted quickly are the ones who got out as big winners now, and we see that. You're absolutely right, yeah. So,
Guy, you're working internationally a lot. So is there a difference between German manager and international managers?
You know what? I have this question often, whether it's about management strategy or negotiation, communication, which is also your field. I truly believe that people are people. The only difference is the way they communicate with each other and what they want. A classic example is somebody asking for a discount for whatever. So a German manager would say, maybe, and not even sure they would, could I please have a discount? And either they get it or not. And maybe someone more from the south towards the equator will go, are you crazy? This is way too much. You're killing my company. They want the same thing, Nikolai, right? But the way they communicate it is different. And honestly, no, I don't think there's actual differences. There is communication differences. There is some other differences in maybe practices. And the biggest difference in leadership actually is not necessarily how the people act, but what the people expect from a manager. So leadership standards are different around the world. People want a different kind of leader in this part of the world than in other parts of the world. And if you look at politicians, you see exactly what that means. An American wants a very classic type of JFK, Obama, Bill Clinton, charismatic, high-power leadership. Germans don't really want that, also because of history. Charismatic, high-power German leaders are a bit frowned upon because of what happened not so long ago. But they look more for the calculated, not too many risk taker, more quiet. And again, just look at the current chancellor or Merkel, who's done a great job without getting into politics for many years. We look for different leadership standards, I do think, ultimately, and communication as already described.
We talk about management, and we talk also about negotiation, because negotiation is a big topic in your field. Yeah. Especially in your consulting business. So is there any difference between German managers negotiating than other managers from around the world? Are there a lot of cultural differences in negotiation?
There are surely cultural differences in anything we do, also negotiations. But let's start from the basics. Most people are just bad negotiators. Not because they're bad people or stupid people, no, not at all, because we don't learn it properly, especially in German-speaking countries. I am one of very few negotiation scholars in this country in business, And even I am not allowed to call myself a negotiation professor officially, because we don't have that institute as a possibility in our schools. And when you look at American or English or other university systems, there's many more negotiation courses, classes, schools. So it starts with that. And experiments show, and this is not just for the Germans, for anybody, that up to 80% of top managers could reach better negotiation results if they were just more trained in it. And it's crazy because, we all negotiate every single day, multiple times with bosses and colleagues and families and kids. And then we never learn to do it properly. So in general, we have a weakness in negotiation anywhere in the world. But then
why is this guy? I have a son, and if you watch children, you see they negotiate all the time.
Yeah.
They want to have sweets, they want to have toys, they want to have smartphones. They negotiate the whole day long. And when we left school, we lost it, the ability.
Yeah, and even if we have it or don't have it, we still think we're great negotiators. And this has to do with two big phenomena. Well, first one, unfortunately, and we're also two men here, that most top managers are still men, unfortunately, because women have much less ego when it comes to negotiation. So there's many studies that women are, I don't want to say the better negotiators, but for example, they're better prepared than men. Because men go into negotiation like, I can do this, I'm a top manager, I've done this 100 times. A woman won't do that. She would prefer to spend more time preparing, reading, getting herself educated. So that's one reason, at least when it comes to men. And the second reason is, of course, the fact that you never know what's in the head of the other side. So all our psychology always tells us, I'm such a great negotiator, I did such a great deal, simply because we just don't know that we didn't. And we will never know that the other guy is telling himself the same thing. I made a great deal. There's a great story about a guy from Europe who goes to a bazaar somewhere, let's say in the Middle East, and wants to buy a carpet. And he asks, how much is this carpet? The person tells him $1,000. And he's like, are you crazy? I'll give you 100. He knows he has to negotiate. So they do this haggling, right? 900, 200, and they meet somewhere in the middle. He takes the carpet on his shoulder and flies back home to Europe. And then he goes to his wife. I'm such a great negotiator, right? I got that carpet for 500 instead of 1,000. And he's happy. But he doesn't know, and will never know, that at the exact same time, the guy who sold him the carpet tells his wife, I'm such a great negotiator. I just fooled this stupid tourist to pay $500 for a fake. And they're both happy. and that's the problem, because we never know what's in the other side's head. So, there's this nice phenomenon called above the average effect. Most of us think we're above the average in whatever we do. Intelligence, negotiation, management. A beautiful study saying that 84%, I believe, of American car drivers believe they're better car drivers than the average. That can't work mathematically, right?
That's the same in German with soccer trainer. Yeah.
That's really not my field of specialty, but I can imagine. By the way, 85 or 4% of French people believe they're better lovers than the average. Again, fitting the French. But of course, that can't work mathematically. And this is our psychology that kills our negotiation and our egos. And yes, us being men, very shortly speaking.
Yeah, but that's an interesting parallel, because in communication, in professional communication, it's the same. You're more successful if you prepared for a speech, for a trade fair appearance, for a talk show interview, and that appears to be the same with negotiations. So why don't Germans learn to prepare? Are they too arrogant?
Actually, Germans are considered one of the best prepared in the world, being German. So compared to other cultures, they're quite well prepared. Again, of course, we're generalizing here, 82 more million people. But again, in general, managers are generally not well prepared. The Germans maybe a bit more than others. They are quite tedious when it comes to negotiation. So maybe that's actually an advantage. The disadvantage of German negotiators often, especially in middle management, is actually that Germans are so structured often, especially in big corporates, that they're limited by their own structure. So a big part of negotiation, successful negotiation, is creativity, finding creative solutions for problems. And often the German structure is actually so structured that it kills the creativity. Let me give you an example. Let's say your boss gave you the mandate to negotiate something with me between 1 million and 2 million euros. This is your budget. And I come and I say, listen, Nikolai, I don't have 1 million euros. I have 800,000, but I could pay you another 200,000 next year and I'll buy two instead of one or whatever. And this is where the German starts to stutter because this was not defined in advance by their manager. So corporates kill the Germans, but not just the Germans.
Has it to do something with creativity also?
I don't think the Germans are less creative than others. And my proof for this is that the higher up you go in Germany, if you look at independent people, family-owned businesses, so the actual owners, and of course, top managers, they're actually quite creative, not less than their peers. But structure kills creativity. And since German corporations are very structured and hierarchic, especially the big ones, that definitely kills creativity. And then people start focusing more on things like, politics and who did more and show off and stuff like that. So corporates are the bigger problem, I would say.
Okay. So let's wrap up this. So we need some more soft skills as KPIs. We need less structure, more fantasy, more empathy, probably to talk to the other one. And we have to prepare better in business for negotiations and also for communications.
And we need to know what to focus on because sometimes we have an information overflow. And if somebody can keep a plane flying with 300 people inside from dying by using 6 instruments, then you can definitely keep your department flying by using 5 or 6 KPIs.
Wow. Thank you so much, Guy. That was a great flight with you. I hope we see in another plane sooner or later.
Yeah, in a real one, not just
in a real one. And all the best to you and your students.
Thank you, Nikolai. It was good talking to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Guy.
Bye.
If you would like to watch all of our new episodes, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.